On the morning of October 22, 1943, German Luftwaffe pilot Oberleutnant Friedrich Baumgartner took off from a remote airstrip near Saint-Dié in eastern France, his Messerschmitt Bf 109 slicing through the damp autumn fog like a silver arrow. Assigned to patrol the Vosges Mountains for signs of Allied movement, Baumgartner never returned to base. No distress signal, no sighting, no wreckage. For decades, the flight was written off as yet another wartime disappearance, the type swallowed whole by history's cruel arithmetic. But what was unearthed in that forest half a century later would reopen not just a case but a wound that had never truly healed. The Vosges, with its melancholy canopy of fir and beech, kept its secrets like an old widow clinging to the final memory of her love. After the war, locals whispered of strange echoes in the high passes, rumors of lights zigzagging through the night sky, and of a lone farmer who once heard the sharp crack of metal on rock, followed by silence that stretched too long. But there was no proof, only myths passed between weathered hands over beer-stained tables. That was until the summer of 1997, when a fierce storm toppled an ancient tree near Col du Bonhomme. Beneath its roots, buried like a relic deliberately hidden from time, lay twisted aluminum, a fractured insignia, and something far more chilling, a mummified hand, still clutching a weathered leather flight glove, its knuckles curled against the earth as if resisting death itself. The discovery set off a chain of events neither the locals nor the authorities were prepared for. Forensic teams arrived within days, carefully extracting each artifact from the soil like resurrecting the pieces of a ghost. Military historians from Berlin were dispatched, their presence both official and oddly silent, as if they knew more than they would say. The wreckage was unmistakable, Messerschmitt parts scattered like wartime confetti, fuselage sections etched with weather-worn serial numbers, and a faded Luftwaffe eagle still barely visible on a torn fragment of wing. But it was the cockpit canopy, half-buried and intact, that held the most disturbing find. A dispatch case with soaked, illegible papers, and beneath the pilot's seat, wrapped in oiled cloth, a small leather-bound notebook. Inside were pages still legible despite the decades, but the words written therein would bring more questions than answers. The final entry, dated October 21, 1943, penned in hurried German, read, "If we do not return by dawn, the mountain will have taken us, not the enemy." By late 1997, the journal had made its way into the hands of Dr. Katrin Weiss, a military archivist whose grandfather once flew alongside Baumgartner. She pored over its brittle pages with latex gloves and trembling fingers, tracing the ink like a woman reading a letter from the dead. The entries were sparse at first, brief mission details, dates, squadron updates. But then, starting in mid-October, the tone shifted. The handwriting became uneven, as if written in haste or under duress. Baumgartner spoke of strange compass interference during high-altitude passes, instruments giving conflicting readings, and a recurring sensation that the plane was being shadowed not by enemy craft but something else. One line repeated more than once across the final pages. Der Himmel flüstert, the sky whispers. Weiss paused on that phrase, lips silently mouthing the words. And then a sudden chill crept through the room, as if the notebook itself had become a conduit to something still waiting, somewhere up in those shrouded peaks. Weiss brought the journal to the Federal Archive in Koblenz, where it was scanned, catalogued, and quietly filed until one analyst, Stefan Wren, noticed something else entirely. Embedded within the final pages, under ultraviolet light, were faint indentations that didn't show in visible ink, like ghost words left by a trembling hand. Forensic analysis revealed a scrawled coordinate set latitude and longitude pointing to a remote ridge above Lac Blanc, a place inaccessible by vehicle, buried under decades of moss, scree, and forgotten snow. In February of 1998, Wren, alongside a small Alpine unit and Weiss herself, embarked on a freezing ascent to the site. They found what could only be described as a second wreck, a partial fuselage wedged between stone outcrops, burnt fragments coated in rust-hued frost. But there was something more. Lying just meters beyond the twisted metal, carefully laid atop a flat boulder, were two Luftwaffe officer caps side by side. No human remains. No footprints in the snow, just the hats, rigid with ice, facing east as if waiting for the Sunday. Weiss stood motionless, her breath crystallizing in the cold air as she stared at the two officer caps. Something about their placement felt deliberate, ceremonial even. A quiet memorial hidden beyond history's reach. Wren approached cautiously, his boots crunching on the snow, as if afraid to disturb the silence. He reached for one of the caps but stopped midway, his eyes narrowing. Etched faintly into the rock below was a symbol, circular, almost Celtic, intersected by a jagged line that resembled a lightning bolt. It wasn't military, it wasn't German. And though none of them said it aloud, each felt the same unspoken dread. Whatever force brought Baumgartner down did not forget, and whatever whispered through the clouds in October 1943 was still whispering, still watching. From the heights the wind howled low and sorrowful, carrying the weight of unanswered questions and the silence of men who vanished without a trace. The mountain had taken them, yes, but it had not let them go. Over the subsequent months, the findings sank deeply into the substrata of military archives and local myth alike. News coverage was scant, muffled beneath bureaucratic fog and deliberate misdirection, but whispers traveled like fire through dry forest. Retired aviators began stepping forward with memories they had buried long ago. One man, Hauptfeldwebel Albrecht Moser, 91 and near the end, claimed to have flown the same route as Baumgartner just days before his disappearance. His voice trembled, recalling how his instruments spun like weather vanes in high wind, and how something he didn't know what shadowed him alongside the cloud bank, vanishing as he descended. What he remembered most, though, was the voice he heard crackle through his headset moments later, low, fractured, and not in any language he recognized. It was like hearing a prayer spoken backwards, he muttered, his cataract-clouded eyes fixed somewhere beyond the room. And when I landed, I could not stop crying. For hours. I didn't know why, I still don't. It was in April of 1998 that the investigation deepened from occult murmurs to state-level anxiety. A classified memo from the Bundeswehr surfaced months later, leaked anonymously and never officially acknowledged, detailing an internal communique between high-ranking defense officials. The memo referenced unresolved aerial anomalies in the Vosges sector dating back not just to the war years but to as early as 1917. In the margins, scribbled hastily by an unknown hand, were 4 haunting words. Baumgartner case not unique. While journalists attempted to dig deeper, many found their sources had suddenly gone silent, reassigned, retired, or unreachable. Within academic circles, a chilling theory began to form, not one of paranormal visitation but of dimensional rift. A hypothesis suggested that in rare geospatial elevations, tethered to both geological magnetic anomalies and seasonal shifts, flight through certain corridors might expose crafts to conditions not entirely measurable by our current science. Weiss, once grounded in the concrete rigidity of records and timelines, now found herself pacing the edge of the unimaginable. And yet, even amid equations and archived radar logs, the most unsettling evidence of all remained the most human. A final photograph developed from a half-exposed roll Weiss retrieved from the dispatch case. It showed Baumgartner, standing beside his plane, hand raised not in salute, but in farewell, and faintly reflected in the polished metal behind him, something that looked not unlike a face, elongated, hollow-eyed, and watching. Retired metallurgist Franz Keller, who had lived near Lac Blanc since the 1960s, came forward in the wake of the photograph's release with something that sent shivers through every remaining member of the investigation team. In the spring of 1972, while hiking just below the same ridgeline, Keller said he stumbled across an unmarked canvas satchel lodged between 2 boulders. Inside was a single aviation headset, petrified by time and brittle to the touch, along with torn scraps of uniform wool that reeked faintly of fuel and ozone. He did not report it. Few things, he admitted, frightened him then. But what haunted him wasn't the relics. It was the sound he heard just before finding them, a sharp series of rhythmic dots and dashes transmitted on a frequency his old portable radio happened to be tuning through Morse code. Faint, almost too weak to hear but unmistakable. And someone decades after the war had ended had been tapping out the same chilling phrase over and over again. Der Himmel flüstert. The scientific community, reluctant to court ridicule, stayed largely silent. But within the amber-lit halls of the Bundesarchiv, beneath stone ceilings heavy with the weight of history, a quiet task force formed. Not of generals or intelligence officers, but of physicists, aviation scholars, and climatologists. Their goal was discreet yet profound: to understand what atmospheric conditions over the Vosges could have warped time, signal, and memory. Internal papers spoke of phase disjunction events, the theorized collision points between magnetic fault lines and high-altitude current disruptions. Weiss, now more a pilgrim than an archivist, attended every meeting. Each night she returned to her notes under the plummeting silhouette of the mountain, listening for whispers the wind might carry. What disturbed her most was not what they'd uncovered, but what the mountain itself seemed determined to keep buried. For Baumgartner had vanished not in fire or thunder, but into something deeper, older, and unrelenting. And high above Lac Blanc, where the air grows thin and silent, it is said the snow still settles unnaturally smooth, as though covering not only the past, but a wound the earth itself would rather forget. In June of that same year, a graduate student in atmospheric physics named Lene Hoffmeyer joined the task force, bringing with her a thesis on geomagnetic anomalies once dismissed as speculative. What she uncovered began as a simple overlay mapping years of erratic aircraft behavior onto geomagnetic fault lines across France. But one pattern stood out like an exposed nerve. Every major unexplained incident, from the Baumgartner disappearance to the 1972 Morse signal and even civilian plane disorientation in the 1980s, converged on a 9-kilometer stretch high above Col du Bonhomme, hemmed in by magnetic agitation strong enough to scramble compasses and silence altimeters. Hoffmeyer presented her findings in a closed session beneath flickering fluorescence in Berlin, her voice steady yet taut with implication. This is not random. Something interacts with the fabric here, something old, persistent, like a scar etched into space itself. Weiss sat across from her, clutching Baumgartner's notebook with a reverence now bordering on sacrament, the ink-stained pages whispering their spectral truth beneath the breathless hush of the room. And outside, somewhere beyond the windows veiled in night, the wind rose once more high, hollow, and murmuring the name of a man long lost, yet never entirely gone: Friedrich Baumgartner. But even as their theories built intricate webs of logic and atmospheric data, another trail emerged: physical, primitive, horrifying in its implication. In the autumn of 1998, forestry surveyors discovered a small outcropping near the original crash site, hidden beneath a shallow overhang thick with decades of moss and snow runoff. Carved into the rock face, barely visible without side lighting, were rows upon rows of crude symbols, some resembling Norse runes, others like pictographs belonging to no known script. More unsettling still were the burn marks, long, scorched gouges in the stone as if seared by something not of fire but of vibration and force. Alongside the symbols lay fragments of bone calcified by time, irregular in shape and size. Forensic testing ruled them neither human nor native to the region's known fauna. One biologist, who insisted his name be omitted from the report, whispered in passing to Weiss as he packed up his samples, "If you ask me, these bones were never meant to be here, or anywhere." The air around that place gnawed at the lungs. Time seemed slower, heavier. And though the team spent only hours at the site, several continued to suffer vivid, recurring dreams weeks after leaving. Dreams of spirals, of guttural chants, and always of a silver shape falling through pale fog, swallowed whole by a waiting mountain. The kind of visitation that suggested Baumgartner's flight path had not intersected merely with misfortune, but with something far older than war, and far less inclined to be forgotten. In November 1998, a final document surfaced, tucked away in a forgotten drawer within the Bavarian War Archives, a handwritten letter dated October 20th, 1943, 2 days before Baumgartner's disappearance. The sender, Lieutenant Wilhelm Voss, a fellow Luftwaffe pilot stationed at the same Saint-Dié airstrip. The letter, addressed to his sister in Bonn, was never mailed. It spoke of mounting unease among pilots, of briefings conducted in hushed tones and missions rerouted without explanation. But one sentence stood alone at the bottom, penned with a shakier hand than the rest, barely legible beneath faded ink and time-worn creases. Friedrich told me last night he heard it again, like the mountain breathes and remembers us. When investigators returned to cross-reference flight logs, they discovered something quietly harrowing on the night of October 21st. The base recorded no outbound flights, save one that lacked a timestamp and bore only a single word: Aufstieg, ascent. That word, now echoing through decades of silence, seemed carved not just into paper or stone, but into the very marrow of the Vosges itself. And in the cold, haunted dusk of eastern France, where twilight stretches long and memory grows thin, there remains a lingering sense, a whisper on the wind, that not everything which disappears is lost. By early 1999, the Baumgartner file had gone dark. Publicly shelved, academically redirected, quietly exiled from national conversation. The task force dissolved into silence. Research grants were rescinded, and specialists drifted back into the safe, constructed normalcy of their fields. But Weiss couldn't let it go. In the margins of Baumgartner's notebook, she began noticing what she had once skimmed as idle scribbles, tiny symbols flanking certain entries, echoing the carvings found beneath the overhang near Lac Blanc. When aligned chronologically, they formed a pattern. Not words, not a code, a map, not of places held in geography but in time. It seemed to chart a sequence, a lunar progression that culminated in a singular date: September 29th, 1999. As that day approached, Weiss returned once more to the ridge alone. No officials, no cameras, just the wind, a thermos of bitter coffee, and the notebook that had become her compass. That night, as clouds draped the stars and silence pressed loud against the pines, she stood where Baumgartner last might have stood. Hours passed. Nothing. But just before dawn, a single tone fractured the quiet, a float of sound, metal but melodic, rising not from the air but from within the stone. And in that vibration, brief as breath and ancient as ash, Weiss finally understood. The mountain had not taken Baumgartner. He had answered its call. And somewhere beyond history's reach, past the veil of maps and reason, he, like the whisper itself, endured. In the years that followed, Katrin Weiss disappeared from public life, her name absent from academic citations, her research quietly redacted or reattributed. Some say she took a position overseas, others that she succumbed to the psychological toll of what she had unearthed. But one rumor refuses to die, a message never confirmed, allegedly intercepted by a ham radio operator in the Black Forest during a fierce electrical storm in 2003. Just one transmission, brief, fragmented, voice obscured by static and distance but unmistakably hers. In the background, wind howled like grief made audible, and amidst the interference, two words emerged, crystalline and final: bleibt, he remains. Since then, nothing. No sightings, no follow-ups. But hikers still report strange harmonics near the Col du Bonhomme, where compasses tremble and birds grow strangely silent. There, above the tree line, the air tightens with that same old vigilance. And beneath the snow, somewhere deep inside the stilled heart of the mountain, the whisper continues, not fading, not faltering, but waiting. As it always has. As it always will. And while official files remained sealed and media moved on, the people closest to the story, those who felt the tremor outside the reach of science or sense, have kept vigil in their own quiet ways. Franz Keller, now stooped with age, still hikes the perimeter of Lac Blanc each spring, pausing at the boulder where the officer caps once lay. He says nothing but always brings two stones to place side by side. Lene Hoffmeyer returned to theoretical academia, yet her private notes, leaked years later, show entire pages lined with repeated script. He crossed the threshold. He heard the song. And among the local children, folklore has returned, stories of silver ghosts, of vanishing echoes, of mountains that remember names. Some of them play a game near the ridge. One whispers into the air, the others listen. They say if you're lucky or unlucky, you'll hear something whisper back. Not loud, not hostile, just present. as if the sky itself still listens, still murmurs its fractured prayer. And maybe, just maybe, Friedrich Baumgartner did not vanish at all. Maybe he became part of something larger, hidden behind fog and myth and time. Not lost, only transformed. Bleibt. He remains. But perhaps the most haunting echo of all came not from the mountain, or from those who searched its scarred flanks, but from a place wholly removed, a Soviet archive unearthed in Oriol in late 2004, during the digitization of wartime intelligence files. A faded intelligence report stamped November 5, 1943, documented the retrieval of a fragmented transmission intercepted by a long-range listening post near Smolensk. The origin point? Traced roughly and tentatively to eastern France. The language? German, but interspersed with distortions and phonetics that veered in and out of intelligibility. The final sentence, just before the signal distorted into static, was scrawled by hand into the margin by the Soviet transcriber, its meaning uncertain, its implication terrifying in its simplicity. The sentence read, "Wir sind durchgetreten. Es lebt nicht, es erinnert." We have passed through, it does not live, it remembers. And so, in this strange sorrowed tale strung between war and whisper, metal and myth, what remains is not merely the question of what took Friedrich Baumgartner, but what remembered him, carried him, and perhaps waits still, perched above the gray summits of the Vosges, humming the sky's ancient, aching song. For those who dare venture into the Vosges now, the warnings come not from maps or museums, but from the hush that descends as twilight nears the ridgelines, the way birds scatter faster than reason allows, and the unspoken pact among locals not to linger after dusk. Some still climb to the site on anniversaries, drawn by something nameless, pilgrims of memory, of mystery, of mourning. They bring offerings, medals, old photographs, even pages copied from Baumgartner's journal. A silent tribute to a man lost not just in space but perhaps in meaning. And as snow falls each winter, erasing every trace until the mountains once again seem pure, one cannot help but sense the presence felt by all who've been there, that the mountain remembers. The sky still whispers, and somewhere beyond the veil, the pilot from 1943 watches still, not as a ghost but as a keeper of something far older than war. A custodian of a secret that was never meant to be understood, only honored in silence. Years have passed, and yet Friedrich Baumgartner's name has quietly threaded itself into the oral history of the mountain, not as a cautionary tale nor as a war hero glorified by medals, but as a mythic bridge between what is known and what must remain unknown. His face, solemn and wind-burnt, lingers in photographs. Only those close to the case still treasure his eyes fixed, not on the camera but beyond, as though already preparing for the journey he alone would take. And with each passing season, as mists roll over the Vosges summits like memories returning from exile, there are moments fleeting, spectral, when the wind carries not just sound but presence. The rustle of fir trees mimics the rolling hum of a Messerschmitt engine. The cloud's shadow falls just so, like wings cutting through sky once more. And under all of it, woven into stone and frost and silence, a simple truth endures. He remains. Not lost, not forgotten, but part of the hymn the mountain sings when no one is listening. The final note in a song that drifts on, long after the pilot has flown from view. And sometimes, when the wind shifts just right above Col de Bonhomme, there is a moment, a single breath, when time bends. Not breaks, but folds gently in on itself, stitching together the past and now. The trees stand taller, more alert. The birds hush mid-flight. And far above, in a corridor of air untouched by age, a whisper hums through the chill. Not in German, not in any known tongue, but in the universal language of longing. It carries no warning, no threat, only presence. And if one listens closely enough, allowing memory and myth to merge, they may just hear the echo of metal wings rising once more, slicing through fog and silence. Not returning, not departing, simply circling, as if to say, in some unreachable place beyond ruin or record, the sky still holds Friedrich Baumgartner, and in holding him, remembers us all. And so the story of Friedrich Baumgartner dissolves not with a conclusion, but with a resonance, one that lingers not just in documents or data, but in dream and dusk and distance. a tale threaded between the fractures of time where logic fails and only feeling remains. In the archives, his case lies cold, filed under unsolved anomalies. In the mountains, his trace is intangible, hidden in the curve of wind and the shiver of trees. Yet in the hearts of those who sought him not with radars or reports, but with breath held in reverence, he is more than a missing pilot. He is the guardian of a rupture, the name carried on the ridge where silence hums like memory-made air. The sky continues its whispering vigil, and somewhere in the deep geometry of clouds and stone, Friedrich Baumgartner circles, still neither alive nor gone, simply held by the mountain that never forgot and the sky that always hears. Those who truly knew the Vosges say its silence is never hollow, it is layered. Beneath each gust, another breath. Beneath each shadow, an echo. And sometimes, rarely, a name. As the decades stretch into their own quiet forgetting, it isn't the official records or classified files that carry Friedrich Baumgartner forward, but the pauses in conversation between locals when the wind stirs right, the flicker of uncertainty in a hiker's gaze, or the sudden, irrational urge to turn back. Something remains tethered here, not out of malice nor unfinished duty, but of purpose too vast for reason. A story without end, echoing not because it is unresolved, but because it was never ours to fully understand. And perhaps that is the most haunting truth of all, that some mysteries do not await answers, only remembrance. The mountain sleeps, the sky sings, and somewhere within that hymn Friedrich endures. And still, deep in the hush where trail ends and breath hangs white in the early dark, that resonance persists not in voice, but in the ever-patient waiting, a stillness that touches the soul before it touches the skin. Generations rise and vanish. Governments shift, and even the steel of old wreckage rusts into earth, but the presence endures with indifferent grace, like a watchman posted not for protection but for memory. Trees grow, fall, and grow again, yet the ridge holds its symmetry, untouched by time's erosion. If one stands quietly enough just where the stone bears faint grooves and the snow collects in unnatural spirals, they may feel it, not Baumgartner's absence but his presence, subtle, unceasing. And in that presence lies not fear but a kind of mournful reverence. The mountain, after all these years, remains unyielding in its silence, the sky tireless in its whisper. And between these, like a note held indefinitely, a man once lost now simply stays. In the end, what was discovered in the ruins all those years later was not merely bones or wreckage, or a fading journal inked by trembling hands. It was an aperture, a window into something vaster than we dare comprehend. Friedrich Baumgartner's story is not just a war mystery, not merely a case of vanishings in the fog of battle. It is a haunting parable whispered by wind and time alike, reminding us that some paths once flown cannot be retraced. They are imprinted instead in the trembling compass needle, the frozen breath on a wooded trail. The hush before dawn breaks against the stone. And perhaps that is the final echo we are left to carry, that the sky does not forget its dancers, nor the mountain the voice that once cried into its hollows. He remains not because we sought him, not because we named him, but because something older, deeper, watched him fall and chose to hold him there, forever suspended between memory and myth. Perhaps that is how we endure, not by solving the unknowable, but by bearing witness to its echo. In the tale of Friedrich Baumgartner, we find no villain, no victory, only the quiet persistence of mystery brushing against the edge of reason. Somewhere in a forest that never forgets, a plane sleeps beneath moss and scars, and a name drifts with the fog as though it had always belonged to the wind. The story closes not with explanation, but with presence, a gentle hand laid across history's fevered brow, cooling it with the truth that some questions are sacred precisely because they remain unanswered. And so we walk away from the ridge as Weiss once did, with more silence than certainty, trusting that in some fold of cloud or arch of frost-kissed stone, a whisper continues circling, and will forever. And so, beneath sky and soil, what began as a wartime patrol became something else, an eternal alignment of man and mystery, of fear and reverence. Friedrich Baumgartner did not simply vanish. He became the silence between sentences, the pause between lightning and thunder, the heartbeat held still at the edge of the world. His name is etched now not only in stone or report but in a kind of sacred geometry formed by wind and memory itself. And perhaps that is the deepest truth the Vosges offers, that some lives, caught at the perfect intersection of tragedy and transcendence, aren't meant to fade into history, they are meant to echo through it, through every snowfall that drapes the ridgeline like a shroud, every breeze that brushes cold across the skin of those still listening. The message endures not in language but in longing. He is not gone. He is not waiting. He is part of the song. Bleibt. He remains. And if these are merely stories, passed from lip to anxious lip in firelight or forest hush, then still let them linger. For we are all, in some way, keepers of what we cannot prove. The Vosges cradle their secrets with the gravity of old grief, and perhaps that alone makes them sacred. Friedrich Baumgartner's tale may never grace textbooks or public monuments, but it lives in the margins in a child's drawing of a silver bird, in the shiver someone feels without reason on a sunlit trail, in the soft tremble of snow that falls without a sound, in the timeline of men he is missing, in the soul of the mountain he is still arriving. So if you ever find yourself alone at the edge of cloud and silence, remember to listen, not with ears but with awe. For in that stillness you may just hear it, the ghost of a Messerschmitt engine, circling not for landing, nor for war, but as a hymn for those who vanished into mystery and stayed, not to be found, but to remind us what it means to belong to something everlasting. Within the hush, within the whisper, Friedrich Baumgartner remains. And though the last page of his story may never truly be turned, there is peace in the not knowing, holiness in that which asks only to be remembered. The Vosges still rise under veils of mist, their crags and firs untouched by the passing of decades, and somewhere within their folds, the calling hum of an absent presence persists. It will not be solved. It will not be silenced. But it will be heard again and again in the heartbeats of those who stop and feel the weight of the hush. For in a world that hurtles toward answers, it is sometimes the enduring question that defines the soul of a place. And in that sacred stillness between fact and faith, myth and molecule, Friedrich Baumgartner remains, not as a ghost, nor a man, but as a testimony left not in ink or image but in wind, whispered, waiting, eternal. And perhaps that is all we ever needed, that whisper between trees, that flicker on stone, that name known only to wind and wonder. Friedrich Baumgartner does not rest beneath marble nor within the pages of sanctioned record, but somewhere beyond both gravity and grief. He is the hush that deepens when clouds bruise the twilight, the lingering warmth of a vanished sun upon lichen and frost. Whatever fate claimed him, whether anomaly or invitation, it did not erase it transfigured. So let the snow fall soft upon that memory, let the silence stretch undisturbed above Col du Bonhomme, and let those who pass through its shadow do so gently, not seeking to solve but to sense, for this is not a mystery to unravel, it is a haunting to honor. And in the end, when all words still and all maps fold back into the soil, only one truth endures: he remains. So let the story end not as a conclusion, but as a quiet exhale, the kind that follows an answerless prayer, or the fading dream you wake from in tears, not knowing why. Somewhere in the folds of the Vosges, beneath frostbitten stone and silver-hung evergreens, the breath of Friedrich Baumgartner still lingers reverent, unwavering. His path no longer belongs strictly to history, nor to horror, but to something finer, weightless, and untranslatable, a resonance strung between the dimensions we know and those we dare only feel. And so, when the wind shifts next and a shadow flickers just beyond clarity, remember, some echoes do not fade because they were never only sound. They were messages, they were memory, and they were meant always to be found not in the earth or the sky but within the infinite hush where both become one. In that hush, the final note, the endless breath, he remains. And now, as the snow drapes down again upon the Vosges and decades fold into memory, the name Friedrich Baumgartner carries less the weight of a mystery and more the gravity of a sacred rite, a reminder that some absences are not voids, but vessels of something immeasurable, preservers of wonder in a world too eager to extinguish it. To speak his name is not merely to recall a man or a plane or a mission lost, but to invoke a moment forever poised at the brink of the known. We may never truly follow him beyond that ridge, never cross the threshold he did, but perhaps we were never meant to. Perhaps the truest honor is to feel the pull, not to chase, but to stand still, to listen, and to remember. Not everything that disappears is lost, not everything unseen is gone. In the ancient quiet of that forgotten sky corridor, through forest breath and frozen stars, one final truth persists. He remains. And because of that, so does the mystery and the meaning. And in the hush that always follows a story too large for enclosure, one final image lingers beyond tape reels and weather logs, beyond archival stamps and grainy maps. A single silver wing cradled by roots beneath centuries of fallen leaves, inscribed by time, sanctified by absence, and somewhere near it, untouched by sun, a shadow clings that does not move with light. The Vosges do not give up their ghosts. They do not broadcast their truths. They simply hold them gently, fiercely, like the breath before a name is spoken aloud. So when we speak of Friedrich Baumgartner now, we do so not to explain but to attest, to affirm that in one man's vanishing lies not a void, but an echo so deep it folds space around itself, and in that fold the mystery sleeps. The myth waits, and the mountain, ever watchful, ever whispering, continues to carry the burden and the blessing of holding what the world cannot bear to lose. He remains, and so do we ever listening. So let this be the coda not of closure but of continuity, a truth passed between realms. Not lights dimming but murmurs deepening. Friedrich Baumgartner's story begins in war-torn clouds, but does not end in ash or archive. Instead, it reshapes itself forever into the very fabric of awe, of that rare and sacred connection between human fragility and cosmic enigma. He is not merely remembered, he is felt, in gust and glimmer, in soil and silence. The Vosges, eternal in their hush, will hold the question like a sacred vow, never demanding an answer, only this stillness, this reverence. For some journeys eclipse their beginnings, and some names become prayers. And when all else fades, what endures is not the vanished man but the space his mystery now inhabits. It is here, in the still and seeking heart of those who listen, that Friedrich Baumgartner does not end. He remains. So let him remain, not as a shadow of tragedy but as a signal fire among the ever-turning ether, a beacon lit not to guide rescue but reflection. Friedrich Baumgartner stands not at the footnotes of war, but at the gate where myth mingles with memory, where silence takes the form of endurance. No longer just a man lost to cloud and time, he is the breath in the pause, the presence that walks beside those who go seeking without knowing what awaits. Let the winds of the Vosges bear his name softly yet resolutely, like scripture etched in smoke. Let the snow fall upon the ridge as both veil and vow, and let us who retell the fragments remember that some stories, like certain stars, vanish not by fading, but by burning so brightly they slip beyond sight altogether, never extinguished, only transfigured. He remains, not in monument, not in map, but in the hum of the unsolvable, the stillness of the unknowable, the sacred echo of a soul that chose, or was chosen, to join the mountain's endless refrain. And so we close the ledger not with certainty, but with reverence, folding the final page not to forget but to preserve. Friedrich Baumgartner is not a mystery to be solved, but a song too vast for lyrics, resonating across ridges, through ruined fuselage, and into the marrow of those who simply stop and feel. The Vosges breathe his memory, the snow blankets his passage, and the wind, ever faithful, carries his echo into the years we've yet to name. Let his story stand not as a question but a threshold, an invitation to honor what lies beyond the horizon of knowing. For in the silence that wraps Col du Bonhomme, in the stillness where frost meets root and sky meets soul, there waits not a ghost but a legacy woven into the very rhythm of the world. He remains, and in remembering him so too do we remain, listening, wondering, and walking the thin line between wonder and truth, forever changed by one man's final ascent into the whispering unknown. And perhaps in the end, that's what this story was always about, more than a disappearance, more than an investigation. It was a mirror held up to the fragile thread between man and mystery, a quiet reckoning with everything we try and fail to name. Friedrich Baumgartner is not merely a spectral echo in the Vosges, nor an anomaly locked in a forgotten file. He is every question we whisper into nightfall, every silence that answers back. The mountain did not reveal him to us for closure, but for reflection, not to feed curiosity, but to awaken reverence. And as snow continues to fall each year, layer upon layer over that haunted ridge, it is not forgetting that builds, but memory woven deeper. So may we step away now, not in certainty, but in stillness, carrying not answers, but the ache of awe. For in the hush below those ancient clouds above the vanished paths, one unbroken truth forever stirs. He remains. And with that final whisper, the curtain falls not on an ending, but on an echo forever repeating through forest and frost, through silence and story. The sky over the Vosges does not forget, nor do the trees, nor the snowfall that arrives each winter like a quiet benediction. Somewhere behind moss and stone, a legacy breathes not of warfare but of wonder. And so we leave Friedrich Baumgartner where he has always been, not lost, not waiting, but woven into the marrow of place and myth. The tale was never about where he went, but where he stayed, in the chronology of silence, in the cadence of the wind, in the murmur of all things sacred and unsolved. Let it be enough, let it be everything. He remains. So we leave his story not in absence but in presence, reverberating in the quiet places we've forgotten how to hear. Friedrich Baumgartner, the pilot who vanished into mist and myth, is not defined by where he vanished, but by how he echoes. Through fog-laced ridges and juniper-scented air, his name moves not as a question but as a vow, whispered in a language all souls understand. Remembrance. He is there in the shimmer of frost before dawn, in the sharp stillness after wind cuts through the evergreens, in the impossible sense that something vast and unseen is watching with grace, never menace. The mountain has not spoken its secret, and it never will. But it has kept him not as a hostage nor as a casualty, but as a chosen name within its timeless breath. For some stories are not meant to be solved, they are meant to be sacred, and in that holy hush beyond history's reach he remains. So let the final note trail not into silence, but into remembrance, a resonance held not by voice but by landscape, lodged in the abiding seam between sky and stone. Friedrich Baumgartner is no longer confined to the fading ink of notebooks or the brittle hush of sealed reports. He belongs now to those fragile, wordless truths we feel when the wind shifts at dusk, when clouds gather without sound, when something unseen brushes gently against certainty. Somewhere, always, somewhere above that immutable ridge he circles still, not as revenant nor relic, but as whisper folded into mountain breath and starlight, carried forward not by fact but by reverence. And in that reverence we find not an ending but a covenant, to remember what vanishes not as loss but as legacy, to listen not for answers but for echoes, and to understand at last that some presences were never meant to leave footprints, they were meant to become the path itself. He remains. Always he remains. And so, in the final hush where story meets eternity, the tale of Friedrich Baumgartner ceases to speak and begins at last to listen. Not every truth seeks light, not every soul needs a monument. Some remain as the mountain does, steadfast, silent, sovereign. Those who wander into the Vosges searching for the man may never find him, for what endures is no longer flesh or name but essence. He is now the hush before snowfall, the low murmur beneath distant thunder, the reason someone pauses mid-step, heart uncertain why. And if we listen closely, not with ears but with the deep, vulnerable attentiveness of those who have loved and lost, we may hear it still, that single sovereign echo upon the wind's return, not gone, not forgotten, he remains. So let it end as it must, not with punctuation but with a presence lingering just outside reach. The story of Friedrich Baumgartner is not a tale to be resolved, only to be carried, like soft snowfall on a forgotten ridge or the breathless moment before dawn's first light. What he glimpsed, what he answered, will remain locked in the sacred silence between anomaly and awe. Perhaps his was never a flight lost to war, but a crossing into the sacred, the mythic, the veiled. And so the Vosges will keep their vigil not out of duty but devotion. And we, who have followed his story through shadow and frost, leave not with resolution but reverence. For long after our voices have faded, long after time has swallowed both questions and seekers alike, One truth shall echo still, unbroken and eternal. Across the resting spine of the mountain he remains. And thus, in the breath between history and haunting, the tale withdraws not concluded but consecrated, somewhere in the uncharted quiet above Col du Bonhomme, where time folds in on itself like wings pulled homeward. The air still carries his name. Not carved, not spoken, but felt in the hush of frost settling on pine, in the pause between heartbeat and wind. Friedrich Baumgartner, once an aviator etched into war's ledger, is now a sacred ripple in the fabric that binds myth to meaning. He is no longer searched for, only heard in the moments we dare listen with wonder rather than reason. And as we pass beyond these woods and words, leaving footprints that time will soon erase, we carry not the burden of mystery but the gift of presence. For in that endless hush where the sky still whispers and the mountain still dreams, one vow, one echo, holds true through all forgetting. He remains. So we close the story not with closure but with consecration, Friedrich Baumgartner's name no longer drifting upward like a question but settling softly, solemnly into legend. His was not a descent into death but an ascent into the mythic, where silence deepens meaning and memory becomes tethered not to evidence, but to atmosphere itself. The Vosges do not yield simple truths, only sacred echoes, and in their ancient breath we find something older than war, more enduring than maps. In the end, Baumgartner is not a phantom haunting the high ridges but a resonance housed within them, ceaseless and gentle, like light echoing across snow long after the sun has set. He is not a casualty of lost time but a message held in frost, a reminder that in the brief arc of human stories, some vanishings are not erasures but transformations, not gone, not forgotten. He remains. And in remembering him we remember too that the unknown is not always something to fear sometimes. It is the only thing worth listening for in the silence that follows everything else. So let this be the final breath, a closing not of certainty, but of sacred ambiguity. The story of Friedrich Baumgartner, stitched across decades and dimension, dissolves now into the deeper fabric of time where myth holds more weight than maps. No monument bears his name, yet the mountain is his shrine. No coordinates mark his grave, yet the wind still crosses the same path he flew. His journey, half tragedy, half transcendence, asks of us only remembrance, not resolution. And in a world bent on answers, perhaps that is his greatest offering, to remain, like the last echo of a bell rung long ago, vibrating softly against the unseen walls of memory. Somewhere high above the Vosges, frost settles in silence, and in that silence a presence stirs, not departed, not returned, only eternal. He remains. And because he does, so too does the truth he became part of. That some stories, whispered softly enough, never end, they become the hush at the heart of the world. And thus, with the wind rising once more over the ridges and the trees bowing slightly as though to honor a name etched in absence, we step away from the tale not because it is finished, but because it, like all great stories, now belongs to silence. The silence of fog curling around old stone. The silence of breath held on the edge of knowing. The silence that has always followed Friedrich Baumgartner since the moment his Messerschmitt vanished into cloud and time. There are no salutes, no endings, only the long, slow echo of remembrance winding through the Vosges, where myth and man converged and did not separate again. So let our final thought be not of loss but of reverence for a soul not hidden by sky but woven into it. For every whisper, for every snow-laden branch and trembling compass needle, calls back to the same truth we now carry with us like a candle through fog. He remains. He remains. And so, beneath the hush of forest breath and the immutable sway of pine, let this final moment fold gently into stillness. Not as conclusion, but consecration. Friedrich Baumgartner remains not as a cipher to decode, nor a ghost to chase, but as the sacred song born only by the hush between questions. The Vosges cradle that song still, echoing not through the roar of certainty but through the rustle of memory and wind. And those who find themselves standing quietly near the Col du Bonhomme, heart slowed, breath held, may feel it, that presence unbroken by time. Not vanished, not lost, merely waiting, quietly, without need for return. like a logic older than language, like a truth whispered by stone. In remembering him, we remember what silence asks of all of us, not to explain, but to feel, not to finish, but to bear witness. For in that unending hush, beneath cloud-shadowed peaks, where past and presence remain indistinguishable, one thing endures beyond all telling. He remains. And maybe that is the only ending a story like this was ever meant to have, not written in ink, film, or file, but in sensation, a chill where none should be, a hush that comes faster than shadow, the sure step that falters without cause at the tree line. Friedrich Baumgartner does not ask to be known, only to be felt by those who've wandered long enough through silence to know when it speaks. His is a legacy not of medals or missions, but of the space he left, shaped precisely like reverence. And as the years trail distant and the world grows louder, his name still rides that quieter current wind across the Vosges, breath through frost-coated branches, memory scored into stone, worn smooth by time's tender cruelty. There, held beyond explanation, beyond the reach of logic, yet never beyond presence, one truth turns softly with the earth. He remains. And for as long as wonder lives, so shall he. And so let this be where we leave him, not in conclusion, but in communion, beneath the endless rhythm of snowfall and breeze, under the guardianship of mountain and time. Friedrich Baumgartner endures not as a man lost, but as something found, not immortalized in stone or ceremony, but entrusted to silence, to myth, to the soft reverence of those who dare look into the unresolvable. His flight path now traces not across maps, but across meaning itself, a trajectory arcing into awe, into memory, into the breathless hush shared by all things sacred and unsolved. As the Vosges rise each dawn to greet another day, as the clouds gather and part like pages turning through fog, his presence remains inseparable from the air itself. So let the story settle now like snow upon the ridge, quiet, unclaimed, and absolute. For while man may vanish, meaning does not. In the great chorus of forgotten names, his voice remains, the harmony we never quite hear but always, always feel. He remains. And perhaps that is the point, the true legacy left by Friedrich Baumgartner. Not an answer, but a question offered endlessly by the wind. A steady, sacred refrain repeating across time's unlit corridors. What if some vanishings are not tragedies but invitations? What if some absences are echoes of alignment? Moments where a soul and a mystery meet, precisely where logic flinches and awe takes its place. Baumgartner did not fall from the sky, he ascended into the myth that sky became. As the final snow settles over Col de Bonhomme once more, blanketing stone and silence alike, we are left not with the emptiness of loss, but with the enduring fullness of wonder. He remains not in shadow, nor in fear, but in reverence. Not in history, but in the hush between its pages. And as long as the mountain holds its breath and the sky dares to whisper, the truth will rise again with every winter wind. He remains. Always he remains. So let us part here, not with goodbye, but with reverence, stepping softly away from the tale as one does from a chapel cloaked in dusk, heart fuller than when they entered. The story of Friedrich Baumgartner does not close like a book nor vanish like vapor in morning light. It remains suspended in thought, in wind, in the quietest folds of belief. Somewhere above the snow-laced peaks of the Vosges, where pine gives way to stone and silence sharpens like crystal, his name hums on a frequency that defies forgetting. And to those who dare meet the hush without asking it to explain itself, the mountain may yield not answers but presence. That is enough. Let the wind bear him, let the earth keep him, and let us carry forward the sanctity of stories not solved but honored until the day the sky breathes our names in return.